or good evening, or depending on what time zone you are in. I wanted to get started. We're just at the top of the hour here, but we've got a lot of content to discuss in this next hour. So we'll get right into it. Today, so many folks on the call here are part of the e-cig System Operations and Market Design Working Group. My name is Eric Ela from the Electric Power Research Institute, and I am co-chair of the System Operations and Market Design Working Group. So we talk about various topics related to operations of renewables, of other emerging technologies, as well as evolution of market design with emerging technologies and integrating these technologies across the energy sector and the different ways of ensuring reliability, economic efficiency, and environmental objectives as well. So the topic of today is a paper that I happen to be a part of across a multi-partner team that we want to share with this group, because we do think that there's a lot of useful information there. We'll really kind of do a rapid fire discussion of that information today. Really the goal is to make sure folks are aware that this exists, and hopefully get enough enthusiasm from the call today to go and download it and use it for however you may like to use it for learning information and also understanding of priorities and key gaps that are still there. So we have a number of speakers part of that are part of this team. So I won't give any bios for each of them, but Yinong San will kick us off in a few minutes. She is a energy systems modeler from NREL and actually the lead author of this report that we're discussing. Then Todd Levin, who is the principal investigator of the project, an energy systems engineer with Argonne National Laboratory. We'll have Andrew Mills, a research scientist with Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Robin Broder Hytowitz, colleague of mine at EPRI. Benjamin Hobbs, professor at Johns Hopkins University, as well as Bethany Frew, who is the co-principal investigator also with NREL. So before we get into the paper that we'll be discussing today, and I'm realizing now this might be in the way, wanted to talk a little bit about the overall project. So you can see there on the right, the partners that are part of this project, funded by the Department of Energy through its grid modernization laboratory consortium set of projects, which includes various programs from the Department of Energy. It's kind of a three stages of the project. We're really in the middle of it now. The first being topic selection, background research, literature review, which is really the focus of this paper that we'll talk about, facilitating discussion with key staff from the ISOs and RTOs in the United States, as well as other key experts around electricity markets and other aspects that are focused on ISO and RTO regions. But really the goal of the project is providing technical assistance for various organizations, including the ISOs and RTOs that are part of these ISO and RTO restructured regions of the US. As part of that first step, also identifying key challenges. Right now, looking at applying tools, models, and different methods to conduct the technical analysis that we saw as high priority from those discussions, coordinate with the ISOs throughout that execution, bringing their feedback to the project, and then nearing the end of the project, and as an example today, is having various workshops with key staff, providing tech transfer, really providing this pathway to enhance knowledge, including the adaptation of tools and methods within RTO ISO regions. So hopefully you'll hear more from us in the future. This project is a 3-year project. We're potentially looking at some follow-on, but once the actual technical analysis of the project and results are able to be shared, we hope to do so at a future system operations and market design working group call, or as part of the larger e-cig group, or via other means. So just wanted to give that quick overview of the project, and then the agenda today is to introduce the report, some of the prioritization results that were part of it, and then we'll go through these 6 topical overviews, including what has been done by ISOs and RTOs to date around these 6 topical areas, what gaps still exist, so resource adequacy, system resilience, reliability services and operational flexibility, electricity price formation, emerging technology integration, T&D coordination, as well as wholesale and retail interactions, and then finally transmission expansion planning and financial transmission rights. So it's a mouthful. We've got a lot to share. The team's going to try really hard to keep on time so that we can still have some Q&A, but really we hope to just give you a very quick snapshot of the work and then encourage you to download the report and then reach out to us if you'd like to be more involved as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Yinong Sun of NREL to give us the introduction. And I should also mention before I hand it off to Yinong that we are doing our Q&A through the Slido platform with the code of ESIG1. So if you have questions, add them to Slido. Feel free to give thumbs up or down if you like or dislike the question, and that's a good way for us to prioritize the questions at the end. Over to you, Yinong.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, Eric, and also thank you for providing the opportunity for us to present our work here. The report we are presenting today, as Eric mentioned, is actually a first product of this JMLC project. So this report establishes a broad research agenda by identifying research gaps and priorities that are relevant to the wholesale electricity market design in a 2 to 10 year time frame. We first identified some major market design topic areas and research opportunities through an extensive review of ISO publications, industry reports, and some of the academic literature. Those market challenges and research questions are then prioritized by the inputs from ISO and RTO representatives during a stakeholder workshop in April 2020. And this final product is this 100-page long document with rich details. Next slide, please. Here, the figure shows the 6 topic areas for market design discussion, as well as their ranking based on the poll results we got from the ISO RTO representatives. Basically, during the stakeholder workshop, we asked each ISO RTO participant to rank those 6 topic areas in their perceived order of priority for research needs. And we then quantify those ranking on a linear scale from 0% to 100%. And this figure shows the average ranking across all the ISO representatives. Actually, those topic areas also reflects some common themes of market design that our system operators are considering. So first, how to efficiently incentivize investment for resources that are needed for long-run reliability, especially in a world with a lot of zero marginal cost resources. Also, how to provide incentives to for operational reliability and flexibility, how to integrate those emerging technologies into market operation, and finally, how to improve transmission planning process and enhance the coordination between transmission and distribution systems to better reflect the great needs for the future. Those 6 topic areas also guide the structure of this report. Each section of the report corresponds to one topic area, and within the section, we present current market practice, recent market changes, and some specific challenges and findings we've got from the literature. Next slide, please. Within each topic area, we also identified different market challenges and research opportunities that are relevant, as I mentioned, for 2 to 10 year time horizon. And we also asked the ISO participants to rank those subtopic challenges as well. Basically, this table here summarizes some final prioritization of both the topic area, which is from the top row to the bottom row as descending order of priority, as well as the subtopic market challenges from left to right, again, descending order of ranking. We will get deeper into each of those topics, coming back. Yeah, we will talk this very soon, but I just want to note that there are a number of overlaps between challenges. As you can see, for example, the capacity credit calculations shows up in both emerging technologies and resource adequacy topic areas. And also, for example, cost recoveries under emergencies is closely related to scarcity and shortage pricing, as well as ancillary service market design. So all of those overlaps just also highlights the fundamentally interconnected nature of different market products and design elements. And now let's go into each of the topic area. I'll start with this resource adequacy and system resilience topic. Changes in system resource mix may require updates in both the way, for example, that we measure and quantify the reliability requirement, but also how to calculate different technologies' contribution to system resource adequacy. For example, increasing amount of viable renewable resources and the emergence of new technologies may suggest more differentiated design of capacity requirements, because those can better reflect the temporal, locational, and service-specific values that the system needs for capacity. On the other hand, fuel security and energy adequacy become more and more important as we consider energy-limited resources such as battery storage, natural gas with a limited fuel supply to some extent, or even variable renewable resources, if we consider wind and solar as fuel. Not to say the lessons we've learned from the recent extreme weather events. All of them are suggesting the need to consider operational details into resource adequacy and resilience assessments. And with those contexts, we identified 7 major, just one more thing from the last one. Yeah, research questions in this area that is shown in this paper, in this figure here. And now I'll talk through in 2 slides very soon. And we can see the reliability assessment and capacity calculations are ranked as the top 2 in this area. And then going to the next. Before we get into the specific challenges, here I'll just briefly talk about some recent changes in on resource adequacy. You can find the details of all of those activities in the report, and I don't really plan to go through this table line by line. Instead, I just want to highlight a couple of themes in these recent ISO changes and proposals. First of all, fuel security has become a buzzword in a lot of markets, and this is even before the February event. For example, Northeastern ISOs have started conducting assessment on fuel security levels and start to explore ways to ensure fuel security and energy needs. Secondly, how to accommodate state-level policies into centralized capacity market was a major topic last year, and it is a continuing one. The implementation of those buyer-side mitigation rules and their specific impacts are still a question mark. Thirdly, many ISOs have been or are proposing to update their capacity credit calculation methods for variable renewable technologies, for example, to adopt probabilistic-based methods for calculation. And finally, there are some other general resource adequacy rule changes being discussed in markets in order to meet the changing grid needs. Those including topics on reliability requirement assessment, for example, demand curves for centralized capacity markets, and the deliverability of some of those resource adequacy products. Next, please. As I mentioned, based on the literature survey, we identified those 7 research topics as future opportunities. Here is showing in the order of the priority ranking. Again, I'd love to highlight a couple themes or some major aspects based on those identified challenges. First, we need to get the assessment right for both the reliability requirement and for the individual technology's contribution. This would include, for example, to improve reliability assessment methods, such as using probabilistic-based calculation to set requirements, to develop more granular requirements so that we can provide more accurate signals for form capacity in the times and locations that are needed mostly. And also a stronger linkage between the engineering-based assessment and economics in the reliability requirement is also needed. Then on the resource contribution end, future research is needed for capacity calculation, not only for the quantification for some local resources, but also the calculation and performance evaluation for some import resources. System operators have started adopting probabilistic-based methods to calculate capacity credits, but more work is needed to quantify the capacity contribution of emerging technologies, such as battery storage and distributed resources. Also, in systems that are heavily relying on imports, questions remain on, for example, how to calculate those resources contribution based on regional contracts and generation portfolio, and how to evaluate the performance of them in day-ahead and real-time markets. A second theme is about market mechanisms to procure firm capacity for extreme weather events. We all agree that market rules could be improved to incentivize sufficient fuel supply arrangements, and also further exploration is needed to incorporate fuel security and energy sufficiency into reliability and resilience contributions. The third topic relates to accommodating state-level policy in capacity market. As I mentioned in the previous slide, question still remains on, for example, what might be the most economic efficient way to do this, and what are the potential impacts on technology development and consumer costs. And finally, there are several general market design questions. For example, in ISO and RTOs that have centralized capacity markets, considerations are needed on the shape and parameters for the capacity demand curve, such as the slope, the cost of new entry values being used, as well as the procurement level for the target. Other questions also include, for example, does current market design incentivize technology agnostic incentives for investment, or are there any improvements that we can make to achieve those? Also, do we need new market products to encourage specific attributes from resources, or to ensure fuel supply, and how to design them? The section in the report has much more details on all of those things, but generally we can see that there are a lot of questions remain to be answered in the topic area for resource adequacy and resilience. I'll stop here and now handing over to Robin for the next two topics.
Thank you, Yinong. And I think with the next couple topics, you'll certainly see familiar themes in addition to themes in specific areas. You'll also notice all of our slides are very wordy, so we would encourage you to take the slides and read them after, or better yet, look at the report, since I know that it can be a little overwhelming to look at some of these slides. So our next topic is essential reliability services and operational flexibility. And similar to the way Yinong showed the priorities, here we have different priorities in this area ranked. And so the first couple are ones that I'll discuss in a couple of slides. That would be new reserve products, new reserve or flexibility products, and deliverability of reserve. But we also have ancillary service market redesign, temporal considerations, frequency response, and other services. And ranked last was cost recovery during emergencies. And I will note that this was done before the events in Texas and the Midwest last year. So it's possible that this ranking could be different if we did it today, considering some of the extreme events that we've seen. And so a lot of what we heard from stakeholders during this prioritization is thinking about, of course, the changing resource mix and what that might do to our ancillary service or essential reliability services. And so what we had heard from the different ISOs and RTOs is thinking about how to incorporate these new products. That can involve different time scales. So, right, some might be thinking on the seasonal or weeks ahead time frame, where others are thinking about real time. There's also the needs of a specific system, and then what can we actually do to price those different products, whether we need to do something beyond just a simple price. On the next slide, you'll see that we have gone through and looked at the different ISOs and RTOs and what their recent design changes have been in this area. And now, if you've ever seen an EPRI presentation on ancillary services, you've probably seen this diagram on the right. This just will show the different ancillary services in relation to each other. And it's here as a point of reference, not necessarily something you need to get into detail about, but if folks are interested, we can point you to former recent presentations or reports that get into the details of ancillary services. But what I'll point out from the different ISOs and RTOs is that there are many different products that are being proposed or recently implemented across them. And so we can see MISO has recently implemented a short-term reliability service product, which looks at online and offline resources to offer capacity, and that's in a 30-minute time frame. So short-term, not short-term 5 minutes, but short-term for 30 minutes. I'll also note that both SPP and CAISO are really thinking about flexibility in their upcoming products. So they're a ramp product and an uncertainty product from SPP, and then 2 products at CAISO, an imbalance reserve products and a reliable capacity product. Both of these are in the day-ahead market, thinking about what is needed, the kind of flexibility that could be needed by real time. And so some of these are being proposed, some of them are being implemented, and another ISO to note is ERCOT, which is going through the process of a redesign since their day-ahead and since their real-time energy and ancillary service markets were not co-optimized, and they're starting to go through the implementation process of co-optimizing them. They've also introduced some new products, including their fast frequency response service. And so you can see through these different products that there's already a lot being done or proposed to be done in the ISOs and RTOs as we go forward. But on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the challenges. And so as we've seen, new reserve products are certainly forefront on folks' minds. There are already many that are out there. And now the question is, could there be more needed? Can we reduce some of them? Do we need all of the ones that we have? And so in thinking about that challenge, right, we first think about the needs, right? Do we have an increased need due to forecast error? Do we have increased needs of flexibility? And in some systems, flexibility could be ramping capability. In other systems, that could be needing lower minimum operating levels. So that could be very system dependent. And also thinking about system risk, right? Later, we'll talk a little bit about the demand side, but if there's more participation from the demand side, could that pose a risk to operators? And of course, the timeframes can be different. As I mentioned, the short-term, medium-term, long-term, right? If you're potentially thinking a week out versus 5 minutes from now, those are very different kind of products. The last thing I'll talk about on this slide for research opportunities is the deliverability of products. And many ISOs have already begun to think about how to incorporate deliverability constraints into their different reserve products, right? If you procure something on a zonal level, could that actually be delivered in real time? And one of the questions that comes up here is it computationally tractable? Are you able to do it? Are you able to do it while you co-optimize, or should it be post-processing? Or should we start thinking about nodal products for ancillary services? So these are just some of the many questions and opportunities in this area. And so now moving on to the next topic. I know it's a run through, but hopefully you'll be intrigued and go to the report. The next topic being price formation. And again, there's certainly a lot of overlap here as with essential reliability services. And you can see that the different priorities again, so we have zero marginal cost world being the top priority, scarcity and shortage pricing, multi-period market pricing and settlement, active demand side participation, and then carbon pricing being the last priority there. And one of the things that many of these have in common, of course, is getting the price right? That's a very key element of any kind of market design, is making sure that the price is right. Now, we might disagree about what the right price might be, but it's, of course, something that we should aim for. And so similar to changes that we've seen in all areas, right, changing resource mix and the new lower cost, the marginal cost of these resources, right? So if we have resources bidding negative, bidding zero or near zero, how does that change our system, right? The questions that kind of come out of this and thinking about what does it mean to get the price right, we heard stakeholders discuss the need for capacity markets, right? Do we need capacity markets if we have the right price paired with scarcity pricing and carbon pricing? Maybe we don't need them, maybe we do. What about operator action, right? If we have operators taking actions in the day, after the day ahead market or intraday that could influence future potential scarcity prices, how much is that influencing potential revenue? And then lastly, thinking about stochastic information. So there's definitely a lot to think about for price formation, and the ISOs have already been changing a little bit. On the next slide, we'll see that in the last 5 to 8 years, a lot of the ISOs have implemented some kind of fast start pricing. And that takes a step in order to incorporate the no load costs or startup costs into the price of quick start units. So many of the both PJM, NISO, and SPP have all implemented or are implementing some form of fast start pricing. MISO was an early adopter with their extended LMP formation, as was ISO New England, and both CAISO and ERCOT have some form of this. But in addition to just fast start pricing, many have been thinking about carbon pricing. California has their greenhouse gas adder, which is a little separate from a traditional carbon price, which is something that I think New York is probably the closest of the ISOs in implementing. And last I had read, I think that they are waiting for New York State to give them a price for carbon. So there's quite a lot done there, but I think the more interesting thing comes next with the challenges. And thinking about moving forward in this potentially zero cost world or very low marginal cost world, what happens? And so on the next slide, we can see that same priority that we had on the first slide, thinking about the zero marginal cost world and scarcity pricing being the top priority. And one of the, I think, interesting questions when we come to the zero marginal cost world are, do we actually need to change markets? And when we've posed this kind of question in settings with our stakeholders, half the time people say, yes, things need to change, and half the time people say, no, small adjustments is all we need. We don't really need major change. So I'd be curious to hear from those in the audience if they think we need to completely scrap markets, or whether they think especially market pricing is sufficient. Another, of course, interesting question there is, do we need unit commitment if these resources no longer have things like startup costs or no load costs? And of course, scarcity and shortage pricing is pretty critical. We talked about it a little bit with the essential reliability services section, and it's something that, of course, we need to get the prices right there. And one of the major questions is, is a single price sufficient? Is a two-step price sufficient, or do we need a demand curve? And if we do, how should they be calculated? So we can see many more questions, but I will stop here and give it over to my next presenter, I think is Andrew. Yeah, take it away.
Great, thanks. I'll address the next topic of integrating new and emerging technologies in wholesale market operations. The highest priority challenge of the ISO RTO representatives was that the deployment of new technologies, particularly variable, inverter-based, and energy-limited resources, may impact essential reliability service requirements. At the same time, such technologies also have an often underutilized ability to provide many of these services themselves. A related high priority is to develop participation models for emerging technologies. These are the market rules that recognize the capability and limitations of different resources to participate in wholesale markets, including in the provision of essential reliability services. An element crucial to the efficient long-term planning is to accurately represent the capability of emerging resources to contribute to overall resource adequacy. And then finally, a lower priority for the ISO RTO representatives is to ensure that wholesale markets enhance overall economic efficiency by facilitating forward contracting. One of the objectives of ISO RTOs in creating products like financial transmission rights is to enable contracting by hedging exposure to things like basis risk. And with an evolving grid mix, the product designs may need to be altered to be effective for new and emerging technologies. Next slide. Many of the recent market initiatives related to emerging technologies are about defining participation models in wholesale markets. FERC Order 719 required elimination of barriers to demand response, and the recent FERC Order 2222 requires participation models for aggregators of distributed energy resources. Then we had FERC Order 825, which highlights the importance of adequately defining how resources participate in wholesale markets, and that can ensure fair competition while rewarding their flexibility and dispatchability. And from that, FERC Order 841 requires participation models that enable energy storage resources to qualify as an eligible asset in the provision of capacity, energy, and ancillary services when technically capable. What we saw is that for many of these storage initiatives, ISO RTOs are beginning to define participation models for hybrid resources, which are often resources that can include combinations of generators with storage. As you can see in this figure here, there can be many different ways to represent and define hybrid resources in wholesale markets. And we see that the participation models on the left-hand side focus more on representing the components as separate independent resources or co-located resources. Then on the right-hand side are participation models where the components are represented more as a single resource or a full hybrid. These different choices of participation models can require changes to the market software and can have broader implications, which drives the need for additional research in the coming years. Next slide. This leads us to the research questions and opportunities for the emerging technologies. As discussed earlier, an important step is defining essential reliability services and what's required of resources to be able to provide those resources. Emerging technologies will need to be able to demonstrate their capability to provide those services. And then comes this question of how can you recognize those capabilities in the market? And one of the challenges is balancing the interests of market participants who are interested in flexibility in bidding and scheduling with the requirements of the system operators to try to optimize the whole system while maintaining reliability. These sort of issues can come up for instance, for combined cycle units, where they might have complex different operating states. And recognizing these complex states requires development of computationally efficient algorithms in the market software that enables this greater access to their flexibility. Similarly, there's a need for more efficient algorithms to allow for multi-period optimization, where you have multiple DERs, storage, and hybrid resources all operating in the same market. And some of this complexity and sort of the need for these new algorithms depends on if and how the ISO RTO is going to try to manage the state of charge in their energy management systems and in the market management systems. And importantly, these are decisions that are all responsibility of the ISO RTO, and they can have long-standing implications for the available options in market design and in operations. With that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Todd, you might be on mute if you can hear us.
I am. Thanks, Eric. Sorry about that. So yeah, this is Todd Levin. I'll be talking a little bit about the T&D coordination and wholesale retail interactions. Similar, we see the prioritization from the ISO stakeholders here. Most of these themes are built around the fact that the grids are transitioning from one-way interactions to more bidirectional interactions. Rooftop solar energy storage are major players here, obviously, as well as demand response and other resources as well. And through this, consumers are increasingly becoming market participants, and traditional markets are not necessarily well designed to coordinate interactions across a large number of smaller bidirectional participants. So, many of these resources, again, battery storage in particular, are going to be very important in future power systems, particularly as we transition towards more decarbonized systems. And as a result, new participation models may be needed to enable efficient participation of these resources and also unlock the value of the services that they can provide. So you can see the prioritization ranking here. You can certainly see some overlap with other topics. Clearly, in the top priority, grid service provision from DERs has a fair amount of overlap with what Andrew was just talking about, and as well as the other entire topic area on reliability services. Situational awareness, I think, is particularly important, came up in the context of state of charge management for storage resources. The two TSO-DSO coordination topics, one a little bit more on modeling and the other a little bit more on administrative or implementation mechanisms, were both priorities. And then for the low priority topics, I'll just point out, I think it's important, and actually important for all of the topic areas, just to reiterate, that we polled ISO RTO representatives. And so these priorities obviously reflect their preferences and their priorities. And other stakeholders may have very different opinions and very different priorities. Immediately coming to mind, our distribution companies may see challenges differently. And so, these are certainly challenges. And throughout this presentation, I just want to reiterate that we don't mean to imply that these are the the ultimate prioritization list, but it's interesting to see this perspective, from the perspective of the ISOs, that is. Okay, next slide, please, Eric. All right, so this just highlights a couple of ongoing activities throughout the North American or the US ISOs. A common theme throughout these are really aggregated participation models to enable distributed resources to participate in capacity, energy, and ancillary service markets. A lot of this is driven by recent FERC orders 841 and 2222. And slightly different approaches, but certainly a common theme throughout the different ISOs. So that's lowering participation requirements or size requirements for participation, and again, enabling aggregation to help with that participation. Some other initiatives as well related to forecasting and enabling more localized price signals to help drive provision of different services. All right, next slide, please. So in terms of research questions and opportunities, again, overlaps related to providing potentially new market services or unlocking the potential of distributed resources to provide existing reliability services. There's plenty of room to understand these issues better, even in the context of existing services, just because the dynamics are so different with distributed energy resources. Understanding how to capture their unique characteristics in wholesale markets, what products can they provide, are new products needed, what, if any, are the benefits of aggregation, or how to manage provision in the absence of aggregation. Additionally, aligning compensation with performance and conducting cost-benefit analysis of different approaches and reliability assessments. Also some interest, just moving down the list, to regulatory and policy concerns, coordination between entities, again, is expected to be a challenge, and more work is kind of needed to understand the overlapping jurisdictional issues or increased coordinations within ISOs or between ISOs just to levelize the playing field for different types of resources. And then, finally, towards the bottom, kind of a maybe more advanced solution is consideration maybe of a DSO, like an ISO-like framework at the distribution level with full localized market prices that fully consider network constraints. Certainly a more forward-looking perspective, and again, maybe wasn't identified as being as high priority to the ISOs just because it may not be on their radar or may not fall under their purview currently, but certainly an area that is worthy of and in need of plenty of active research. That includes settlement methods for that commensurate compensation. So I think I'll leave it there, with the T&D coordination topic, and pass it to Ben Hobbs, I believe, for the next and final topic.
Thank you, Todd. Can you all hear me, I hope? Testing?
That's better, we can.
Sounding good, Ben.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Eric, for organizing this. Thanks to DOE for sponsoring this, and thanks to all the ISO and personnel who gave us terrific input. So transmission planning is last, and well, certainly by this ranking least. But I think given the attention paid in the infrastructure bill that recently passed the Senate, the transmission with a couple of dozen $1 billion to be devoted to it, the American Jobs Plan, which would devote $100 billion or so, and the accelerated timetable that many people are talking about for VERs, these ratings might have changed quite a bit if we were to do this today, and maybe transmission expansion planning wouldn't be at the bottom. So I'm going to summarize some drivers, and then I'll talk about 3 issues. So the drivers. So rapid expansion of VERs far faster than people thought, and maybe even faster yet over the next decade, especially remotely sited ones. And at the same time, markets are expanding geographically. So we have the energy imbalance market for real-time spot markets. And at the same time, we have WRAP, the Western RA program, which is the retitled Northwest Power Pool Resource Adequacy Program, so which is also going to be west-wide. And somewhere they'll meet in the middle with a day-ahead west-wide market. We'll see how that turns out. So at any rate, the rapid penetration of ERs plus geographic expansion means that transmission and associated financial transmission rights are likely to become more valuable as future flow patterns become more variable, as power exchanges become more valuable, and so especially, for example, as trade takes advantage of resource and load diversity across the entire continent. We considered transmission expansion planning and financial transmission rights separately. Both are key to network management. Both are cared a lot about by certain stakeholder groups. The stakeholders who were represented in this polling were mainly engineers from the ISOs. I think if we polled, say, market monitors, we might get a very different ranking. But I think both FTRs and TEP are important. They have distinct purposes, market practices, and challenges, but they are also linked. For example, the issue of FTR revenue insufficiency, how that's handled will give more or less incentive for the transmission owners to efficiently schedule their maintenance and manage outages better. And there's empirical evidence to that effect. Now, I do humbly note that this topic is rated last of the 6 topics, the topic of revenue adequacy, and this is the lowest ranked area. So in other words, we're in the lower right-hand corner of Yinong's matrix. But as Todd noted, if we had asked different people, perhaps the rankings would have been different. So let's go to the next slide, please, Eric. I am not going to grimly march through this. Instead, I'm going to take note of kind of 3 problem areas and research that we've suggested. The first one is uncertainty. Technology is moving incredibly fast. Any of you who've been in the field for a decade or more we've been continuously surprised. So, you know, are we going to get cheap new materials for reconductoring that will really expand the capability of our corridors? Fax devices? Is the world going to be dominated by DERs? What's going to be the role of hydrogen? Maybe battery systems won't be such an important way of soaking up the extra renewables. How is it all going to play out? All I know is that whatever we predict today will be wrong. Also, there'll be big events in the future, like Fukushima, like the President's Day massacre in Texas, Hurricane Ida, the infrastructure bill that will change things a lot. So this implies that we need to avoid placing all the bets on one future, such as betting that it's all going to be a lot of batteries and remote renewables. Analysis shows that the best way to respond to uncertainty is to diversify the grid and perhaps also delay some investments until you learn more about what's going on. And it turns out that considering uncertainty explicitly in planning makes more of a difference than any other improvements that people have investigated in terms of like better production costing or better load flow models. It's really important to consider uncertainty. So in terms of research agenda, we need understanding what uncertainties make the most difference. We need to build models that provide insights and quantification of things like option values. The other, let's see, so I mentioned 3 topics. The second, third, and fourth ones are proactive planning, because a lot of the benefits of transmission are capacity cost savings and resources. Just using production costing models misses a lot of the benefits, economic benefits of transmission. So we need to anticipate how much and where we put our transmission, how we price it will affect investment. Research is needed on the effects of particular institutions. For example, look at how the investment tax credit has skewed investment towards hybridized battery and variable renewable systems. And the disappearance of that credit may change things a lot, or it may not. We need to anticipate these things in planning. We need methods to do that. The third topic is benefit quantification for cost allocation. FERC Order 1000 has not fulfilled its expectations, in part because people don't trust the benefit estimates that underlie cost allocation. And so we need to find out, for example, adaptable cost allocation methods that provide more assurance to all parties that they'll benefit. And the fourth of the three topics is FTRs. We, for example, have persistent revenue inadequacies, and New York ISO's system of assigning those inadequacies, their financial responsibility to transmission owners, has changed, is so it's said, has changed how they do scheduling and how often transmission lines are have been shut down for maintenance. And so maybe that's something other ISOs should consider. Finally, auction efficiency is something that market monitors care a lot about. Are consumers getting the financial benefits of selling, auctioning off FTRs or not? And the fact that the money that consumers get is a lot less than the value of those FTRs to the buyers, well, do the consumers get the benefit of a better working market or not? Some market monitors would like to get RTOs, ISOs out of the business of financial transmission rights. They're not a bank. Other observers say this is a reasonable price to pay for efficient markets, and is in fact essential. And this is an open issue that more research can help with. Eric, I'm done. Turn it back to you.
Right. Thanks, Ben. And thanks all. We actually did a great job of keeping in time and actually had a little bit more time for Q&A than we anticipated. So before we do Q&A, just a couple quick updates. One, we are going to, we have been recording, and that video recording will be shared on the ESIG website. I'm sure you'll get an email from ESIG and or Ryan with the link that will also include the PDF to the slides. So lots of material, of course, and we're kind of picking and choosing the things to highlight. So, you know, looking at the slides can be hopefully very useful, but also the report link if there's more information there. And secondly, just to remind folks of the Slido platform for Q&A. Don't be discouraged about not getting your question answered, because as is typical with the ESIG websites, we do try to respond to you know, almost all the questions when we send out the link later on. So with that, I'm going to invite Bethany through from NREL to come off mute and help moderate the Q&A. Lots of good questions on there that I see, so keep them coming, and we'll try to respond to those as we can.
Great, thanks, Eric. I'm happy to be joining this webinar today. And just one other quick note to build on everything Eric just said, and Ben did mention this when he was speaking, but also want to thank the project funders, which was the Department of Energy. There were several different technology offices who have provided funding for this work, including the Nuclear Office, Office of Electricity, the Wind Technology Office, and the Water Technology Office. So just want to thank those funders as well. So let's move over to Slido and the questions that are rolling in there. And again, just keep adding your questions and keep voting. I'm going to work through from top to bottom in order of the rankings there, which is actively changing. It seems every second here. So the first one is from Russ Philbrick. Zero marginal cost applies to generation. Where is the focus on identifying values and price formation by loads? And isn't this essential for future markets? I think, Andrew, you had mentioned price responsive demand in your topic, and this touches on some of the other areas as well. So I might call on you to maybe kind of reiterate maybe some of the high points that you addressed when you were speaking, and maybe elaborate on those a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that you know, a lot of this was with making sure that these types of resources that are on the demand side can participate in the wholesale markets. and being able to participate in the wholesale markets is recognizing sort of the capabilities of those resources and doing things like that. But that also then, by being a participant and setting a bid or doing something like that, allows you to potentially set the price that would clear the markets. And so, by enabling those resources to be recognized in the market and have those participation models and be able to set the prices, sort of starts to get at this. And whether or not that's sort of essential for the future markets, I think that that's been a long-standing issue. That's been sort of something that's been important for markets. Even when you have a lot of thermal generation on there, you still want to make sure that you're representing the value of power to the demand side. And so, irrespective of whether or not you go to a zero marginal cost future, this is sort of an important direction with it. And then I guess the final thing too is that there's probably also within this area the question of how does storage start to set some of these prices also. That we think of storage as something that has no fuel cost necessarily to it, but with these participation models, one of the things that storage can also be doing is submitting bids and submitting schedules and things like that, and that can also start to affect prices and potentially also set that. So even without necessarily having a fuel, you can still have a bid and still potentially set market prices and drive the evolution of market prices in that way.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And Robin, I'm going to call on you just in case you have anything you want to add to that response, since I know price formation obviously touches on this question as well.
Yeah, certainly. And I think Andrew did a great job summarizing all the points that I was thinking about as well. Yes, zero marginal cost in the zero marginal cost world certainly does apply to generation. I think one thing to note is, we're not sure of the transition and how quickly demand will be able to be an active respondent. And so I think we do need to think a little bit about the generation side now versus just thinking, or I certainly hope, and I imagine a lot of our panelists hope, that the demand side will become more active, since right now we have a one-sided market. And so I think it's important to think about that, even though I think we all hope that the demand side will help us, create actually a demand curve rather than just a pretty much vertical curve.
Great, thanks, guys. All right, and we'll move on to the next question from Mark O'Malley on slide 11, which I think Robin, that might have been from your section. His question is, and I think you even mentioned this verbally as well, it highlights potential ad hoc market evolution. So basically, I think this kind of gets to the point of, Band-Aid solutions are kind of one-off new products or changes versus sort of a fundamental overhaul. And so his question is there a need for a total overhaul? And I know you mentioned this when you were speaking, but maybe you could elaborate or add some more thoughts to that point.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a really good question. And again, it's one that we every so often will pose to some of our members and ask them, our stakeholders, our ISO, RTO stakeholders, saying, is what we have sufficient, or do we really need, to really scrap everything and start over? And it's really about half of them say, let's start over, and half of them say, no, let's just make some moderate changes and keep moving. And so I personally think it would be a fantastic exercise for the industry for a group of people to come together and, say, let's scrap what we have, and what could we think up, and how different would it look? I think that would certainly be a great exercise to do. I personally, I'm not sure which way I'll go. I think it's one of the nice things about this research project is that maybe by the end of it, we can come up with something where we think maybe we're leaning in one direction or the other. So it's a great question.
Excellent. And then I'll just pause for a second in case any of the other panelists want to chime in very, very, very quickly.
So very quickly, is this a Windows Vista moment where it just collapses of its own weight and we need to do something entirely different? And so it's interesting to think about which of these issues might mean we should really design this differently. So a lot of storage, conceivably, when the internal aspects of the resources become too complicated to consider in the software, whether it's degradation costs of batteries or if it's reconfiguration, combined cycle, or something else. At what point does the U.S. model of detailed representation of resources just collapse of its own weight? So I agree, Robin, that would be a very interesting exercise.
Excellent. More future work. Okay, we'll move on that point. Thank you, Ben, for adding that in. So the next question, going back to Russ, who asked another one, is it necessarily true that we need more granular identification of reliability services? Might this become unmanageable, excuse me, with too many? So Yinong, I think I'm going to call on you. I think this question came in when you were presenting, but this does touch on some of the points from Robin's kind of essential reliability services topic as well. So Robin, I'll let you chime in afterwards. But Yinong, at least from a resource adequacy kind of perspective, where we were talking about just on the capacity piece, maybe more dimensions or more aspects or granularity there. Maybe you could offer some thoughts to see if, or to the question of whether this would be unmanageable to add all these different dimensions.
Yeah, sure. So just to be clear, so for what I mentioned to have temporal, locational, and service specific requirement for things, it's not for operational scale, essential reliability services. Those are more for trying to give some requirements on specific resource adequacy products in this long-term time frame. Basically, our current resource adequacy framework doesn't really distinguish like from capacity by its temporal and spatial and all these service attributes. But we all know, like with those changing grid needs, for example, the megawatt you provide at the middle of the day is different from the sunset, or for example, during because of some transmission constraints, you have some certain system-wide resource adequacy requirement, but in the actual operation, due to those transmission issues, those cannot actually be delivered. And also, for example, from the service perspective, like we may want to encourage more resources from an investment perspective to provide more flexibility compared to some other things. This is something I think Kaiso is discussing. So basically, those are what I mean for more granular in terms of resource adequacy requirement, because we need to make sure though we are kind of acquiring the megawatts that are most valuable wherever they need. So that's that point. And I'd love to hand over to Robin for whatever she want to provide on the operational scale as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks, Yinong. I think I'll just briefly add that if we're thinking on the operational scale and thinking about granularity, if we get right from zonal to nodal, as I mentioned, computational tractability is certainly an issue. And I don't know that anyone has necessarily solved that problem. There are many potential solutions, but that's certainly a big question if we did want to get more granular to think about things like deliverability. Thanks.
Great, thanks, ladies. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next question, and there's a couple, there's about two more I really want to get to try to give everyone a chance to respond here. So Ben, I'm going to come back to you really quick, and I think you have already answered this when you were speaking. I think maybe this question came in right beforehand, but just to we can reiterate this point. Is transmission ranked the lowest because you asked market personnel and the topic of research is wholesale markets?
Quick answer is yes. Next question. This wasn't meant to be a scientific survey of everybody involved in all markets. This was, focused on particular market issues faced by market operators, who are mostly focused in spot markets. So, yes.
Yeah, and just because it was last doesn't mean it's still not important. It was just, yeah, the results from that particular day.
Yeah, I want to just jump in here quickly and reiterate again something I think I brought up during my topic, but I mean, so yes, it's almost certainly the case. And also, I just, for everyone and for ourselves included, I don't want to get too distracted by the specific order of the prioritization. It was an interesting exercise and it was really informative for us. But the report itself lays out all of these challenges regardless of where they were ranked. And I think one thing we found through follow-up conversations is that Ben mentioned in the infrastructure bill, transmission has received increasing priority recently. But I think a lot of ISOs are interested in the types of things that improved transmission coordination can provide and the value it provides to the system. It maybe didn't think of that as the first way to get to that end goal. So that's important for us as researchers to also convey that message.
Thanks, Todd.
Bethany. Yep.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. Thanks for jumping in there. And actually, the second question I really wanted to ask is for you. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about the T&D section. I'm actually going to jump down from the top and do the I guess third from the top question that's currently listed in Slido. It says, is the context for this work only applicable to the bulk grid? Are there any considerations for services that could be realized at the local or distribution grids?
Yeah, so I think the clear answer here is well, yes to the second part, because there are considerations for the distribution grid. I saw this question when it came in. I think it was before
Yep.
I talked about my section. So hopefully it's a little bit more clear based on what I talked about. But again, I think part of this is the same perspective issue. So, we're hearing from ISOs, their focus is maybe a little bit further upstream on the bulk power system, but are becoming increasingly aware of the need for improved coordination and kind of the increasing role of these distribution level resources. And I think I saw there's another comment on there about Order 2222, which I think is also important, as that sort of forced them to address these issues, but also beyond just that kind of forced regulatory perspective, has also hopefully opened eyes a little bit to the potential. So certainly there's lots of work to be done here as well.
Great, thanks, Todd. Okay, so I'm looking at the clock and it's now the top of the hour. We chatted briefly internally and agreed that we could all stick on for no more than 5 minutes. So we'll hang on here and kind of work through at least a few more questions in that time. If you do have to drop off, I just want to thank you again for joining and remind you that there are 2 more ESIG webinars coming up this month. The first is September 8th. With improving renewable energy integration with modular power flow control. It's both the GPST and ESIG joint webinar, and it'll be featuring Michael Walsh, who is the COO of SmartWires. And then the second webinar is on September 15th on the integration of distribution and transmission systems. So building on this T&D point that Todd was just talking about a minute ago, we'll be featuring Dr. Fritz Karl, who's an independent consultant. And both of those webinars you can register through ESIG's website, esig.energy. Actually, I'm forgetting what it is. I'm looking at the full link at the top. It's esig.energy/event. But if you just search for ESIG, you can get to the link. Yeah, esig.energy is will get you to the main ESIG website. Okay, so back to the questions. So the next one, I'm just going to go back to the top of the list here. If you did away with unit commitment, and that was something that we had, one of the speakers mentioned earlier on, I think, Robin, if I'm remembering correctly, you had mentioned that as a possibility sort of as the system's evolving. How would you balance the system in that future type of system?
So in that future system, we'd still have economic dispatch. We just necessarily wouldn't have the commitment part, meaning, we wouldn't necessarily have to commit day ahead a slow start unit for real time, since hypothetically there would be few to zero of those. And so we would just have units that could respond very quickly and didn't really have those startup or no load costs. So that's my quick answer there.
Great, thank you. It's perfect. So I'm going to move, I think Russ's question that's not at the top, I think we might have addressed that already. I think the point here is that there's overlap between some of the items, and this gets back to Yinong's matrix that she showed at the very beginning. So I'm going to skip that question because there's quite a few here and wanted to try to get through some more. So the next one from Ben Palos, have any RTOs asked for technical assistance yet? And have they picked specific research topics that they want the consortium to pursue? So Todd, maybe do you want to address this one kind of from a high level objective of the project?
Yeah, so the high level objective of this project is to provide technical assistance to ISO RTOs. So that was the DOE initiative that this project falls under. It's part of the Grid Modernization Lab Consortium initiative. And so this process was actually, or the project was actually part of that process. So we engaged the ISO representatives in our April 2020 workshop and to identify some of these areas, and then we've developed specific technical assistance tasks around their prioritized issues.
Great, and just to build on that really quick, kind of a follow-on question, are stakeholders other than the ISOs or RTOs able to request technical assistance or specific research projects, for example, state energy offices or PUCs?
In general, there are mechanisms for that. This project is specifically designed around ISO RTOs. This is actually a great time, though, to mention, since you mentioned state energy offices and PUCs, that there is currently a parallel GMLC project that is just kicking off that is specifically to provide technical assistance to state energy offices and PUCs, actually PUCs specifically. So if you're interested in that, or if anyone's interested in that, I'm actually involved in that project as well, and I can provide a little bit more information. There's actually a formal application process for that. So feel free to reach out, or you can probably find information online.
Great, perfect. Okay, we'll ask one more question, and really quick before I do that, Russ, if I misunderstood your question that I just skipped over, please email us and we'll follow up with you separately. So the last one actually is another question for Russ, and Andrew is going to come back to you, kind of a follow-up to the response earlier from the demand side response, and how resources can bid in something other than a variable fuel cost, for example. So prices need to reflect costs, is Russ's point. How can storage set the price when most costs are sunk costs? So this gets kind of, I think, the lost opportunity cost discussion.
Yeah, exactly. That's the main point, is that there's an opportunity cost associating with discharging storage now and not having sufficient state of charge to then discharge later. And if you were to look at sort of what your expectations are for how prices are going to evolve, or how the need for the system will change, you wouldn't want to discharge your battery, say at 4 o'clock in the morning or something like that, if you expected that there might be a need for that storage at 8 o'clock in the morning or later in the afternoon. So if you were bidding that resource, you would reflect that opportunity cost of discharging now in your bid. And if you were to kind of take all the bids of different resources and look at them, and that was sort of the marginal resource, that might then set the price. So it's basically that opportunity cost is a true cost to that storage asset, and if that's marginal, that could then set the price. And I guess that's sort of the main idea behind that.
Okay, I think Russ just chimed in again, but you're assuming you're in a zero marginal cost world.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, so this is a good point, is that like, if you don't use the storage to meet that, what's the what's the resource that would be doing it? And maybe that's where it would sort of be the demand side, right? That would be clearing it on that side. So you could still have a price evolution, and you could still have some sort of expectations of what's going to be happening, and then use that to set your bid, I guess. So even if you didn't have a fuel cost of different generators, you could still have expectations of needs being different in the future, and then that setting an opportunity cost for discharging now.
Yeah, and also just to chime in, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I know degradation costs have come up a lot in conversation, or some conversations we've had with ISOs who are using storage, or battery storage in particular, and so there is an actual cost associated with some of these devices to use them. So that could be a small amount, and maybe it's inconsequential in the broader conversation here, but there are some other factors that are truly cost related.
And potentially those would be additive to each other, right? You'd have degradation
Yes.
and opportunity costs you'd be sort of considering.
Exactly. All right, I'm just looking at the clock, and we are past the 5-minute limit that I said we were going to stick to. There's still a couple of questions left. I'm sorry for those who asked. We can try to follow up by email later. But again, just thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you to all the panelists. And again, go to esig.energy to look for those 2 webinars in September that you can join. They're both free, and we hope to see you then.
Thanks.